within leadership positions, there are so many decisions to be made. You have to be able to be comfortable with making that quick decision, but knowing when you have time, let's get the data, let's look at the analysis. But once we make that decision, you got to move forward. There is no instant replay in leadership.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. On this episode, I'm excited to bring to you my conversation with Dr. Anthony Perrenoud. He's the chair and associate professor of the Construction Management Department at Boise State University. Now, I met Anthony years ago when he was the assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma. He was part of the Young Guns. They got a ton of young talent in the College of Architecture and Construction Science there in Norman. And I've always been just really impressed with his thoughtfulness, specifically on leadership. And several years ago, he was lamenting some of the more recent leadership books and some of the issues that he had with them and some ideas that he might have in the future for writing a leadership book. And then juxtaposing that leadership perspective with what he's doing with this next generation of talent coming through the construction management programs at OU and then Boise State University. I think what you will hear is what I have known for a long time. Dr. Anthony Perrenoud is very generous, he's thoughtful, he's smart, and you spend more time around him, you will become smarter. And these are just the type of guests that we want on the show. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Anthony Perrenoud, Chief and Associate Professor of the Construction Management Department at Boise State University. As always, thank you for listening. Dr. Anthony Perrenoud, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bradley. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
You know this. We've been talking about making this happen for at least a couple of years since I visited you in Boise. And I told you about the Construction Leadership Podcast. And you're like, you know what? I got a couple hot takes on. This is what I remember. I don't think you actually said hot takes, but you're like, I got a little hot take on leadership books and leadership research. And I was like, I'm in. Let's do this thing. But let's address this first off. I've known you for a while. Prior to starting this podcast, I did have a little trepidation where I'm like, do I know how to successfully pronounce his last name? And then I logged in and you put your phonetics right there. So I will tee it up for you. Perrenoud, pronounced how?
This has been the lifelong challenge. You know, ancestors coming over from France, Switzerland area, they didn't change the name to the proper English pronunciation. So I have been telling people how to pronounce my name ever since I was, 5 years old. It's Anthony Perrenoud. So, and I just pronounce it Perrenoud, the new guy. Nice to meet you.
Well, I'm glad you did that. And I love phonetics. Keep it real simple. I've been trying to jam 3 syllables in your last name for probably forever. And you're like, Hartman, this guy. Thought we were friends. He doesn't know how to pronounce my last name. So glad we got that cleared up. Can you give us an overview of your background? Because I believe I met you. You've been in Boise now for 3 years?
3 years. And we met in Oklahoma.
Right.
At my first teaching position at the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So,
and I remember it was like lots of young, tall, really smart people who all spoke Spanish. And I'm like, what is all these tall guys who are kind of creeping into my territory as, the bilingual guy? Maybe tell us a little about your background, coming up in the construction industry, where you picked up Spanish, and maybe how you got attracted to, developing this next generation of leaders for the construction site.
Definitely. Yeah. So I grew up, my father was an electrical contractor. So at the age of 13, I started working with him on the summers, pulling wire. and worked with construction all through high school. Graduated high school, worked with him for a couple of years, and I grew up in eastern Idaho, which is similar to the frozen tundra of Alaska. And one winter I'd had enough. I was wearing Carhartts, big Carhartts, wiring homes and projects with gloves, which are, productivity killers. And I said, I had enough. I'm moving to Arizona. So I went to the most drastic, different place and was down in Phoenix, Arizona, working construction. And my passion has always been construction. And that's when I learned about the construction management program at Arizona State University. I picked a great time to graduate from the bachelor's degree in construction management, which was 2009, which is a great time
Perfect.
to graduate.
Never easier to get. Actually, turns out now, market wasn't great at that point.
Yeah. So great time to stay in school. And it was during my graduate studies that I learned about this great job of teaching construction management students. And it was during that time that I got a PhD in construction management at Arizona State, which led me to my first teaching position out at the University of Oklahoma, where I was able to meet you. During that time, I picked up Spanish, and I will not speak it today. My Spanish is not as great as yours, but I'd always had a passion to come back to Idaho, to the Mountain States. And in 2020, I came back here to Boise State University in Boise, Idaho, and within the construction management program. Within a few years, I was put into the department chair position. So I got a whole new aspect of teaching and working with faculty in this leadership position.
Yeah, I was going to say probably a whole new facet of leadership. And I'm going to put that off deliberately. There's a couple things I think that could maybe scaffold up to that kind of discussion about leadership in an academic setting versus a construction site, now that you've done both. But what was interesting was, I might have kind of shared this with you, is I felt early on in my career, early 20s, got out of school, I just recognized that when people I looked up to, whether they were people on the job site that I wanted to earn respect from, or these were people that were higher up the corporate hierarchy and I wanted to ascend there, I felt like unless I read a certain amount of leadership books, and I think a certain type of leadership book, it was going to be hard for me just to stay in conversations. And that led me to You're Good to Greats, You're Built to Last, Your 7 Habits, a lot of the Lencioni stuff. And I just remember just being like, okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this other different language. And it's not even the 80-20 rule when it comes to best-selling books. It's a few books sell 95% in leadership or anything else. And I felt like that really helped me. But I got to a point where this new book comes out and I was like, oh, you got to read this new leadership book. And I'm like, and again, we're not going to name names or anything. And I know how hard it is to write a book, but I didn't feel like I was learning anything new. And I kind of transitioned off into biography. So somewhere in there, I was kind of sharing this with you and you were kind of nodding your head, you kind of coming from the research angle. What was it about that conversation about leadership books that are out there and where you think there might be a gap in the market, and you kind of have a passion or maybe at some point something that you will scratch that itch? But can you go into that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people feel it, but you articulated it in a way that I hadn't heard before.
Well, I too have had that same passion with leadership, and I kind of look back at, I've always been an introvert. Surprisingly, I teach, and a lot of professors are actually introverted. And I had a few great friends that were very extroverted, very much, influential to their peers. And I was always in awe of that. And so I think that's what drove me to I need to figure out what that key to success for motivating. And so I've always been very passionate about leadership, reading leadership books and the psychology behind that. Just how do you influence and drive a team to a goal? And so I've gobbled up so many books over the years. And at the same time, I'm doing my research within construction project management, risk management, which is a whole nother topic that, you can get into lots of heavy research papers, and there's studies done, and seeing this disconnect with the leadership textbooks out there, and I shouldn't call them textbooks, leadership books. And there was a great faculty member at Arizona State that was heavy on like the theories behind that, but I was really interested in like, well, what kind of research is behind that? What is this really valid? Like, or is this just one individual's, perception on leadership? And so there are some great leadership researchers out there. Warren Bennett, he was kind of the father of like leadership research within a university. Ronald Heifetz from Harvard has got a lot of heavy in the research, adaptive leadership books. And so I was just drawn to this. I want to pull out this, see how it's practical, and learn from these studies. And so that's really what I've, tried to pull into our CM program is, okay, there's definitely these individual anecdote, personal stories, but then there's a lot of research behind this that will help you and can be applicable. One of the books that I love, and I know we're going off the topic, but that I love with practical tested theory is called Crucial Conversations. It's such a simple book, but it's like it helps you in that moment in time in which you're in a heated discussion. And there's so many practical lessons that can come from that book. So that's really what I'm drawn towards.
Are there specific criteria that you're looking for? And yeah, you're right. I was going to say that Warren Bennett is, that kind of the godfather of taking, we're going to bring in some good stories. So we're not going to leave that out, but also there's an element of rigor that might not be in other ones. And that's, I think, one of my kind of, I don't want to say it's a complaint. It's one of the best-selling business books of all time. But with Good to Great, when you go and you say, hey, who are the really good companies? And we talk to the good companies, and then we talk to them why they're awesome, and then we tell some stories. You can do all the research you want on that. And you can say, hey, a small army of, MBAs doing research, and we did all this and that. It's hindsight bias. You already kind of know what happens. And stories are really powerful. And I think a lot of those are. However, if you're like, well, if we just do these, can we replicate that? And then you see that many of those companies, almost all those companies that were in whatever, Built to Last or Good to Great, those companies over the next 5 to 10 years had faltered. Why? It's really hard to maintain those leadership positions. Now, what does or doesn't that say about the companies or the stories themselves? Well, that's probably a different podcast. But I guess my question for you, Anthony, is there a criteria that you are looking for where you're saying, all right, I know what I don't want. Here's sort of the few boxes that I want to be able to tick to bring something in that I think does have this researching rigor behind it that is going to help me develop better leaders than us at Boise State. What might those criteria be?
I love leadership stories. I could listen to them all day long. And we actually have a professor in our program that teaches some leadership also. His name is Tony Songer. I call him Tony Storyman Songer because he's just got leadership stories for days. And I love stories. But what I really hope to provide is how can leadership help you in certain situations? What practical items, such as crucial conversations in a stressful situation, what are the practical things that can help you in this situation? I'm a big believer in situational leadership, that the leadership style needs to change depending on the situation. And so if you can help me in like a specific situation, and that's definitely something that I've learned within being in the department chair position, like there's so many unique experiences that you're not prepared for. But if you have something that can help me on how to deal with a upset faculty because their research money is being taken away from them or something like that, that is a situation that I can put into practice. That is helpful for me. Within situational leadership, you have the leader needs to be adaptive to the situation and also adapted to the followers, right? And so the followers, depending on what type of individual that you're working with, you're going to know how to work with different types of people. How to kiss every cow in the pasture.
I've never heard that particularly, but I like it. And I completely agree. And there's a book, Malcolm Gladwell, talk about a guy who can tell good stories and also who can sell millions of copies of those and then have several years later, people totally like just bash the research that he's done on him. But he highly recommends this book that is really heavy on the research. It is dense, but it's worth it. And it's called The Person and the Situation. And I find I fall into this trap too, is when a situation happens with a person inside that, I am more likely to focus on the person, be like, God, Anthony, this is what he does. This is the type of person he does. When this happens, he's vindictive and this is it. Versus saying, let's take a step back. I do know Anthony. Are there stressors? Is there tension? Are there other elements of this situation that might be causing him to act differently in this situation? But I think even that idea, and I remember read like the first 3 pages and all the research that kind of goes back to kind of the mid 50s and beyond, made me realize like, I don't think nearly enough about this. So I love that just basic element of that kind of situational leadership. Let me ask you, where do case studies, if at all, fit in to kind of the learning for students? Because I found I learned a lot from, just people who were, whether tradesmen or leaders in the organizations that I was with, who said, let me just tell you about a story about this unique situation that I was in. And then they would stop and they're like, this is what I was faced with. And you're like, there's like 4 obvious choices. All of them are varying degrees of terrible. Like, what'd you do? I'm like, I feel like those are everywhere. So do case studies play into that at all? Or are those similar or different?
I think with any type of education, even within project management education opportunities, you're teaching the theories behind, I don't know, let's say pre-construction, and creating a budget or something around that. You're teaching the theories behind that. This is why a contractor needs to help out during the pre-construction to ensure that the budget aligns with the owner's bank account. And the stories, they will help engrave that understanding into the student's head. But that third and that final piece of like education is having the student dig into a case study and have to analyze it, right? And so it goes back to all the books that we've read on leadership. There's lots of theories out there, but then it sits on the bookshelf and we don't read it again, right? The stories are there. It's how would I react in this situation? How do other people react? And that's where that case study, I think that's what you're asking, the case study, digging in and really understanding what has happened. That's where one more aspect of learning can be provided for the student.
When it comes to decision making, I've been fascinated to be increasingly in a consultancy role where I'm being brought in to help a very specific objective. And, consultancy 101, you go in and you talk to people like, tell me what you're thinking. What are you feeling? What's going on? What's your perspective? And you kind of gather all those. And sometimes it's pretty obvious that at some point we made a decision or a series of decisions that some knew was a bad idea. And then I will just often ask like, hey, I'm paid from the outside. And part of the reason I'm here is to ruffle some feathers. And I'll just say, walk me through your decision-making process here. And you see about half the group lean back like, that's the question I ask. I get fired. And we will have leaders who will, most of them will say, well, I've been doing this a long time, kind of went with my gut. What do you teach, or what would you recommend, or how can we think about helping people develop a decision-making process to kind of run through that instead of, hey, yes, relying on your gut. That's some sort of kind of pattern recognition, kind of instinctual way. But to what degree can we bring that into the classroom, if at all?
If you don't mind me answering your question with a story or a no, case study of myself, going back to case studies, decision making is like a big deal for me because as a researcher, I want all the data. I want the survey. We'll survey 100 contractors. We'll survey all the faculty, make sure all the students, we'll make sure we're going to get the right decision. That's analysis paralysis, right? It's overloading. It's not the right way. You can't make all the decisions. There's some decisions that you can definitely get a lot of data in. The thing that has helped me the most make quicker decisions is refereeing football. During my graduate years, I picked up reffing high school football, and I love it once we get on the field. It's a great experience, but you have to make the decision, and you have to stay with that decision, or you're going to have the whole stands, second guessing you. So that's the complete opposite of analysis paralysis, is making a decision, seeing what comes through your eyeballs at that moment, make that decision and go with it, whether it's right or wrong. And so there's definitely, you can't be on one of those ends of the spectrum, right? But within leadership positions, there are so many decisions to be made. You have to be able to be comfortable with making that quick decision, but knowing when you have time, let's get the data, let's look at the analysis. But once we make that decision, you got to move forward. There is no instant replay in leadership. Thank goodness high school football does not have instant replay. So I don't have to deal with that. And I just sell the call and that's it. I go forward.
Oh, gosh, I didn't know that. Are there any other takeaways that you've just picked up just about whether it's leadership or management or just personal leadership that might be non-obvious from being in such a unique role where, right, a lot of power can have a lot of approval and negativity come down maybe on the same exact play? Like, what else have you picked up from doing that?
I love this question. I'm so glad you asked this question because this one of the best thing. And so I'm a side judge.
Okay.
I'm on the sideline. And so I'm right next to the team. So I get to see all the players. I get to hear what they're saying. I get to hear what the coaches are saying. And it's amazing. And I love this about being a referee and being a leadership researcher, because every Friday night I get to see a case study on different types of leadership styles. And so every week is somebody different. And it always depends on the head coach. It's always dependent on the head coach's leadership style. And it trickulates down within the players as far as attitude, right? Are they talking? Are they cussing? Are they swearing? Are they talking back to the referees? Are they taunting the other players, right? It all starts with that head coach, right? And so if you have a head coach that's in the referee's ear and really calling them names or doing something trying to get the referee riled up, it's the same thing with the athletes, right? And you know what's crazy? It's the same thing with the parents in the stands. And so the head coach of a high school football team, their attitudes and personality and leadership style impacts the entire community. It's an amazing thing.
I hadn't thought of this before, but I'm sure if you went to a lot of the parents of the student athletes that are there and you said, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what degree do you think your attitude and energy and the way that you behave during these games is malleable versus this is who you are, this is who they are? My guess would be, and I could be wrong, it's most people would think, well, I am who I am and I'm a product of my lived experiences. And then you'd say, actually, I've been doing this for a long time and I can tell you from this school with this team and that coach, not true. Yeah.
I can name the names of the schools and I won't do it today, but it just trickulates into it's a whole community and they are not aware of it. Mm-hmm. Right. And they just think this is the way, high school sports are, but it's not. It is something specific about your community, and that is impacting you as a fan also.
Yeah. I think that just leads to culture and behaviors and mindsets and how you fall into line because we are tribal. Maybe that leads into this question is teaching leadership in the university setting. No insight here. No grand statement. I'm just rambling here. Of course, that's a good idea. However, I also found when I came out of school very ambitious, thought I could make an impact right away. Unlike you, entered in a job market when we just need bodies, right? And then I got on site. I know for a fact, and if anyone who I worked with at that time was listening, let alone if they were older than me, there's an element of followership of, do you know how to be led? And I think there's many elements of that are non-obvious, even for people that know I need to be liked by these people because if they don't like me, they're not going to try to work with me. And then you have a job site where guys are deliberately working against one another, which is never good. Is there a way that you can incorporate that into developing the next set of leaders at Boise State University on how to be a good follower, or maybe do you phrase it a different way?
So leadership is everybody remembers Michael Jordan, right? Everybody talks about Michael Jordan and we forget how important the teammates around them, Scottie Pippen, the B.J. Armstrongs, the Steve Kerr, and it's a team, and we're building a team, right? Unfortunately, sometimes we put so much attention on how great it is to be the leader, we forget how important and necessary you need followers. John Boehner's got a quote. He says, "A leader without a follower is just a man or a woman taking a walk."
I love that.
And, I was the same way. In high school, I had a poster that said, "Lead, follow, or get out of the way." And I wanted to be the leader and I wanted to be the first in line. And for some reason, the follower tagline has like a bad, like, no, you shouldn't be a follower. You don't want to be a sheep, but the thing is, not everybody's going to be the leader. Not all. We have 400 students. We don't need 400 leaders. We need team players. We need team members. And so here at Boise State University, I'm really working on a followership to leadership program, which highlights and incentivizes or motivates students to look at both opportunities to be a great follower and also to be a great leader, right? And recognize those and understand that, to be a great follower, you need to be actively participating, right? Not sitting back and, we have student chapters, we have teams. There's so many things that students in college can participate and be active with and support their community. Unfortunately, like you say, fun is typically number one on their list, but going out and, cleaning up the streets with the student chapter or working on a service project or working within the community, that is really important. And so that's something that I try to help foster within our students. How do you become a great team member? What does that mean? How do you actively participate? Think about the problem and don't just be somebody that's sitting back and waiting for that decision to be made, right? And that's really when you're looking at the leadership follower situation, a leader is nothing without those great active participators that go out of their way. They're not sitting back waiting. They're supporting the leadership decisions, but they're also, being a great team member.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a book, it's called The Captain Class. Have you heard of that at all?
No, I haven't.
It's sports themed. It was one of these books somebody recommended. I listened to the audiobook. I'm like, I was good enough. So then I bought it and then I actually read it. I think you'll probably struggle with some of the research. I don't think it'll kind of meet the criteria there. Really good storytelling, but it goes through and looks at some of the greatest teams of all time in any sort of team sport. So they end up talking about rugby and the All Blacks from New Zealand. There's like a women field hockey team or something maybe. Anyway, the point of it is, if you look at every one of those teams, all of them had a superstar. Jordan, right? The Bulls were in there one of the years, but the 91, 92, and 93 back-to-back championships, they talk about Bill Cartwright and his role, where his role as the captain was in certain times, Jordan knew not to mess with Bill Cartwright. Now, he might go after B.J. Armstrong or, John Paxson, but Cartwright was the one who was kind of saying like, listen, we all can't act like Michael Jordan because we're not all Michael Jordan. However, it's kind of that, what does a good follower, how does knowing your role in that team and how can you kind of support that? But I think there is something, and maybe it's just the vernacular. When you say, I need you to be a good follower, most of us have a lifetime of being raised, of being told you do not want to be a follower. Now, maybe that's because I was hanging around with knuckleheads in high school, but like that's drilled in my brain. And now you're saying, man, I need you to be a good follower. And I'm like, hey, bro, I'm a leader over here. Not yet, you're not. So yeah, there's something there, but that might be worth listening to.
You and I grew up with like the Michael Jordan era, the Magic Johnson era. That was like when I was 10 years old, Michael Jordan, that was it. And we've seen the NBA go to these like superstar teams where all the all-stars are coming onto one team. And we've seen it a number of times. It's just a complete failure, right? Because they don't know how to act as a team, to be that role position. And that's for our students, to become a great leader, you have to understand what a good follower is, what a good role player is, and be okay with that, right? And so that's what we're really trying to do here at Boise State is, first become a great role player, team player, and then you're going to go off and do great things.
Can maybe you give us some insight into what does the early part of that training look like? So like, if you're just introducing the concept of from great followership to great leadership. Like, where do you start? Do you start with freshmen or,
Yeah.
Maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So definitely. So starting with freshmen, and I give them examples of some of our great students that have done some amazing things like leadership. Every year we give out awards of, top student, top senior, and we have students that are doing amazing things, from like leading a competition team to win a national trophy, to working within a community to build, some type of construction project. To I had one student, their fraternity that was, how much money fraternities have? It's unbelievable.
I was in a fraternity. We won't go any further than that, but yeah, I'm aware.
Okay. This one student was responsible for about $1 million worth of food budget for a fraternity. And he's a 19-year-old kid. And I'm just like, so he was leading this fraternity. And it's just amazing that, so I highlight those stories. And those are the things that like get people excited. But hey, you're freshmen. These are seniors doing this when you've got a lot of way to grow. For the community to be good, we need a lot of team members. We need that support. We need you to be active participation in the student chapter events, right? And so before you look, and with the followership to leadership program, I tell them, across your 4 years, I want you to look for opportunities to both follow and then lead, right? And so I give them examples of both, right? In their freshman year, I present this, and then, within the junior year, I bring this up and say, how's it going? Where are we at? And towards the end, of their time, help them. Hey, some of them think that they have to go out and do an amazing life experience changing. It could be as little as hosting a student chapter activity for a night, coordinating the tailgate, right? That is both signs of followership and leadership. And so help them recognize what you're doing right here. This is being a good team member. And that's what you need to do that. And you need to do that consistently, and that will help you be a good leader.
So in your role, obviously with the professors there, assistant professors, your admin, academic assistant, whoever else is there, are you guys literally tracking this kind of per student? Because when you talk about getting involved in experience, I remember for me, like if there was somebody there saying, hey, I want you to get involved, and next semester when we come back, don't tell me that you've been chasing girls, playing the Xbox, and living at the bars. That's not going to be acceptable. If to get you where you want to go in this program, I think I would have listened to that advice. So to what degree are you kind of tracking that and kind of their career through the program?
We have a senior outcome class within the Boise State program where they're taking a test and they're finalizing. I've thought about making it a requirement, but at this point, I haven't made it a requirement to capture that data. Right now, it's really just recommendations. But as far as like helping them foster that, I'm currently wrapping my head around formalizing the process. Again, I don't want to require that all our students have to do leadership. I just want to nudge them along, look for it. So that's something that, we haven't formalized it yet.
Which is probably good. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance there, and just the way that you can nudge people toward making decisions for themselves. And once they do, having more, whether it's autonomy or whatever the wording is, right? There's probably, again, this goes back to, right? This is a meta leadership skill on how you change behaviors of people to do something that will benefit them. However, if you make it a requirement, now all of a sudden the man's making me do this, and now I might just be kind of pencil whipping it or checking the box. So yeah, you're probably right to be really thoughtful about it.
And so, the developing leaders within the construction managers, we like to take initiative. We're, project managers. We like to have the Boise State construction management program is in the past few years just grown so much due to their alumni becoming leaders within the community. And so that's really what we're trying to foster within this program is, hey, you all are going to be the people that are getting recognized right now, as leaders within the Boise community, not just Boise and around the nation, right? And so that has been a huge advantage for the construction management program here at Boise State University in the past few years. We've had some amazing alumni get recognized for their leadership.
I can only imagine that's a gift, because then they are, right, they're seeing that path of here's what the, maybe the next, 10, 15, 25 years looks like. And if I like that, this is someone who was just like me sitting in this position, and this is what they're able to do. If they can do that, I can do that. So that's got to be so powerful.
Definitely.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about books. What would come to mind? You mentioned Crucial Conversations, which I agree. And the thing I like about that too is sometimes you're like, oh, this looks like a really good book, and I think it's going to be practical, and I can just pick it up, and it comes and it's like 800 pages. And I'm like, oh, all right. I was kind of hoping for something a little bit more practical. Get me under 250. I'll probably dive in there quicker. And Crucial Conversations kind of fits that latter mold there. Are there other books that stand out in your mind that you'd either recommend? I know this is an extremely broad question because, again, as we've been discussing, leadership can be any angle, but does any book come to mind that maybe made a difference in your life or that you often recommend to others?
There is one in particular that was one of the earliest leadership books that I read, called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's all about getting outside of the box, getting outside of your own story, getting outside of your head and looking at the situation in other people's eyes. And it kind of goes along with Crucial Conversations about the stories that we tell ourselves. We wrap up and get into thinking that this individual is, doing this because they don't like us, but no, they're just trying to be successful also. So that's one that I definitely recommend quite often, Leadership and Self-Deception.
And if I'm not mistaken, that book, I'm looking over here, I think it's over there. There's not one author. It's written by like an institute. Is that right?
It is.
Okay.
Correct. It's a group, the Arbinger Institute.
Yes, exactly.
And I think they're out of Utah, so they're close to here. But I know that they have a full leadership summit training, just like, but yeah, it's interesting. And why I like it is it's very practical. It helps you.
Yeah, this is one of those books that not only do I remember the book, I remember it kind of blowing my hair back. And it was one of those books that was just suggested at the right time. And I know you've known me long enough. It's stunning that I might have had a distorted view of my self-perception. But Mark Scher of Scher Brothers in Minnesota recommended it. I've never heard of it. I go, who wrote it? He's like, no, it's no author. It's like a company. I'm like, what do you mean it's a company? And we went back and forth. I'm like, how good can a book be if like a company wrote it? I'm like, humans write books. And then I read it. I'm like, that's incredible. Hats off to those guys. I will make sure I dig into them further. I think I've stopped at the book, but that's a book that I don't know, probably read 3 or 4 times since it's been recommended to me, just because they also hit on some personal elements too. I remember there's one with husband and wife kind of dynamic there. And I'm like, yeah, totally. But really helpful.
Another one that, and I'm sorry to go off, another one that I just recently read, that when you say personal, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I just read that. Have you read that?
Oliver Berkman?
Yes.
So go ahead, please.
That one, I was not expecting that. I thought, okay, we're going to learn some time management principles, how to make sure I'm, getting everything out of the day. And no, it is a much higher, personal decision making. That one had a huge impact on me just recently. I just read it this summer. So
yes, there's not too many books where I will, upon finishing the book, I will reach out to the author and just say thank you. So that book kind of came on my radar, I think right before. So I had a small little stroke, not managing my time very well at all, purely environmental factors, which are nice ways doctors tell you that you are being an idiot with your lifestyle choices, and just working too hard, not sleeping enough. And kind of like in my recovery from that, I read that book. I'm on his newsletter. It's wonderful. And you're right. I would say it's almost like a philosophy book on time itself and prioritization and things like that. But yeah, that knocked me back in my seat for sure.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about the stroke, and I think I'm glad to see you here being as energetic as the day that I met you. Bradley, like I'm still impressed with you from the day I met you back in Oklahoma. And I remember saying, yeah, I want to do like a leadership podcast or do some leadership training. And just like, well, just do it. Go do it. And you did it. So I'm amazed by you, Bradley. You're doing great things for both the construction industry and for us with the podcast. I enjoy listening to it.
Well, this is how I like to end most of my podcasts. As soon as the guest falls into the trap of complimenting me, I'm like, and that's why we do it, ladies and gentlemen. We're good here. No, thank you, man. I truly appreciate your friendship. I really enjoy talking to you. I learn a lot from you. Before we go, I want to make it really clear. You guys are just with the growth of your department, what's happening in Boise in general. There's just a ton of excitement going on for anyone that's interested on what you were doing. Boise State University, the construction management program, maybe just if anyone's curious for themselves, anyone else that they know, make it really clear on where people should go to learn more about you and the program that you're running.
Thank you. You know, the Boise State Construction Management Program has grown by almost 200% in the past 5 years. We are in a small it's a mid-sized program in Boise that's kind of remote, but Boise, Idaho has had such great growth that our program is growing a ton. We're working on funding our own building. So it's an amazing feat that we're working on right now. You can learn more about that at the Boise State Construction Management website. My personal research website is called worksconstruction.org. And I do a lot of workforce development. I have a pretty nifty little calculator for comparing the different trades to different graduate degrees and seeing the potential for career earnings over across 20 years. So that's workconstruction.org. But thank you.
Yes, I've used that. I've referred that. You're right. That is very helpful. So that is workconstruction.org.
Correct. All one word, workconstruction.org.
Got it. Okay. All right, man. Well, excited about this. I realize you got your hands full with a lot of stuff, but when you get ready to kind of dig back into there, what you describe for me as kind of a long-term passion project on kind of leadership and research there, keep me posted. Would love to have you back and talk about that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, Bradley. You have a great day.
All right then, friend. How did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Anthony Perrenoud. If you did get value from this episode, please rate and review us on whatever platform you're listening to. That means more to us than you know. And if I could ask for one step further, as new people start listening to podcasts, they are looking for people who are already doing that. They might not even know what a quote unquote podcast player is. I meet people every single week that have not arrived at the place where you and I are, which is understanding how much value and insight we can get from talking to smart people and listening to others like Dr. Anthony Perrenoud. So if you have people in your midst that you work with every day that you think could get value from podcasts in general, ours or otherwise, grab their phone, dial up the app, subscribe to a couple shows, and help them do that. You can literally change someone's life. And my growth over the last 7, 8, 9 years from listening to other people's podcasts has absolutely changed mine. It's been arguably the largest source of growth for me of meeting, quote unquote, all these really smart people from all across the globe who are experts in what they do. That's the power of podcasts. So help somebody out, do that. And if you're not already subscribed, so you can see the videos, we're breaking up these clips from our podcast that we have. And obviously you're listening to this as audio, but we are capturing video on almost every single one of our new episodes, including with Dr. Anthony Perrenoud. So you can find those at YouTube. We want to make them easy to share. And obviously it's all free. So if you go to YouTube and just search Bradley Hartman & Co., you will find Anthony's clips, share them, start a new conversation, run a better job site that is more productive, safer, and more profitable. So as always, thank you for listening. We will close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.